see my screen? Melissa, am I good? Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Yes. Yeah.
Perfect. Great. All right. Welcome. Thanks for everybody showing up. This is always exciting to have people from North Carolina here. And I'm just gonna sort of jump right into it. Like Melissa said, please feel free to put questions in the chat. At the end, we can probably have a good 10 minutes, maybe even a little bit more for questions and answers. I'll also say what I've said before. I am a part of the North Carolina team. And so if you have questions, you want to reach out to me, feel free, reach out. I'll give you a coaching session for free, whether or not you're working with the Economic Developmental Partnership or not. I also have, for people in North Carolina, access to my online course, which is a much longer, much more in-depth course. And if you reach out to me by LinkedIn or by email or through Melissa or Cheryl, we will get you access to that course. So we want to do everything we possibly can to help support you guys and make sure that you can succeed in growing internationally. That's what we do. And now I'm going to just jump into it. And I work with a lot of different people who are in sales management and international sales management. Some of them are really, really good. A couple of my clients have a huge amount of experience selling internationally. And what I hear typically are two different things that are really common among experienced and pretty good salespeople who are selling internationally. And one is they worked for a long time and they just don't successfully find the distributors they want. In general, they can't find them and they're stuck working with 3 to 7 distributors, and they feel that's a big limit to what they're doing. And the other thing is people will say, well, no, I have a lot of distributors. I have great coverage. I'm working with 40 distributors, but honestly, only about 20% of them are any good, and the other 80% really don't do anything for me. These two things are really common. And what we're going to try and do today is we are going to try and get past that. We're going to talk about ways to try and make sure that you get the distributors you need in the right markets. I'll also say before I jump into this, two more things. If you don't know, this is a series. Today we were talking about identifying an initial outreach to distributors. Next month in June, we're talking about the evaluation process to evaluate distributors. In July, we're talking about onboarding distributors. And then in August, we're talking about managing distributors. I would highly recommend that everybody try and get to all of them. This is really good information. And they're all pieces of the puzzle that are going to help you really grow. There are a few different ways to grow your international sales. And one of them is to grow your total addressable market, right? If you have, say, 1,000 potential customers in the United States, you probably have 10 or 15 or 20,000 potential customers in the world. If you have 500,000 potential customers in the United States, you have billions of customers around the world, right? So if we can get into the right markets, then we're going to be doing better, right? Now, like I spoke last time, there's also this 80-20 rule typically about the countries we're getting into. And I'm going to mention this again in the relationship with distributors, okay? There are good markets for you, and then there are less good markets for you. The good markets for you are probably, just to take a very rough estimate, a good market is probably 8 times as good as a bad market, right? So if you find yourself selling into only bad markets because of some mistake or another, you're working a lot harder for a lot less money. If you are selling only into good markets, but you're in all the potential good markets, you're in a great shape. Okay. So what we're going to talk about today is really trying to find the right type of distributor in the right markets and engaging with them. And now I'm going to jump into the part of these lectures that I least like. I don't know how many of you were here last time and how many of you know me, but I'm going to talk over the next hour and change about some things that are probably a little counterintuitive, and they probably don't sound like the type of things other people are telling you. Okay. And there are a lot of good sources of information out there that are going to give you information on how you can do what you're doing and how you can expand internationally. Okay. North Carolina has great programs. The federal government has great programs. They can help you find distributors. They can help you identify distributors. They can help you outreach to distributors. North Carolina has people on the ground around the world. The federal government does too. I am coming at this from a slightly different perspective. I have been a salesman and a sales manager. I was a salesman, I was a regional sales manager, I was a director, and then I was a VP for about 35 years. That's about 125 quarters that I have passed or surpassed quota. Okay, so I'm really a sales guy. I've sold in 135 countries around the world. I've grown markets by 1,000% 4 times. One time I grew it by 4,000%, and I've helped people grow markets by over 100% more times than I can remember. And the only reason that I'm bragging about these things or talking about these things is, again, you really should understand where I'm coming from. And if I tell you something that might seem to be counterintuitive or might seem to go against what somebody else told you, you should evaluate from my perspective where it's come from. A couple of things people have said about me. What Zach taught me allowed me to buy the house I raised my family in and send my kids to university. Zach's unorthodox ideas helped me drive my sales from a few million to almost $100 million. And everybody teaches the rules. Zach is the only guy who teaches you how to win. Again, I'm going to finish up talking about me now. But the reason I talk about this is just I'd like you to suspend disbelief for the next hour or so. Okay. So here's what we are trying to achieve, right? We want you to be selling in all the correct markets with engaged and competent and accountable distributors, and to have systems and cadence of accountability in place. We talked about the markets last time. We're going to talk about the systems mostly in August. Okay. Right now, we're talking about how to get engaged, competent, and accountable distributors. For those of you who were here last month, I talked about Akira Kobayashi. He is a bit of a business hero of mine. He is the guy who invented essentially competitive eating the way we know it. And he does something that all of us do. He just does it better than any of us. And I like to talk about this because a lot of people are using the same system that might have been written about in a book in 1920 for finding and identifying distributors. And what we're going to try and do is totally change that and do it totally differently. Now, on the flip side, this is David Brainsworth. He is the bike coach of the British team, and he has dramatically improved the quality of how England does stuff. And the way he did this was he looked at every little thing that everybody is doing and he figured out how to improve it. Okay, so we're going to do two things here. One is we're going to radically change stuff, and the other is we're going to look at details and dig into the details. And that's pretty much the intro. I'm sorry the intro was so long, but I was trying to put some context down. Okay, now we very often do things randomly, and I hate the idea that we do things randomly. Okay, what do I mean by doing things randomly? Well, we're often, what we're doing is we are standing at a trade show, we put up a sign that says distributors wanted, and we wait for people to come to us. And that is putting all of our strategy, all of our initiative in the hands of somebody else. And I like to say, well, what if we knew that we really needed somebody to run one of our manufacturing lines in our factory? Would we just put up a sign saying, manufacturing guy needed, and wait for some random dude to walk by and then give him the job? That is probably not the way we would do it. What we would probably do would be we would write a job description and we would go looking for this guy, and we might actually be looking through headhunters. We might be looking for somebody who isn't looking for a job right now, but is the right person for us. Okay. So this is what we're trying to do with distributors. We want to, first of all, figure out who that distributor should be. And then what we're going to do is dig into that and find these people, right? Again, I work with a lot of very intelligent, very successful people. And I was talking to a client a few months ago, or about 6 weeks ago, about establishing distributors, and they've been working for years in this business. And talking to them, I couldn't get them to build in their mind what a distributor should look like, right? And I kept saying, okay, who buys your product? Talk about how your product is bought. And they had never really done this exercise before, even though I was talking to two people who, between them, they each had an MBA. They each had about 10 years experience, but they had never done this exercise before. So, and by doing the exercise, by digging into it, we were really able to improve the quality of their distribution network. Okay. So bear with me, and we're going to sort of dig into this a little bit, right? We have some questions. Why, who, when, what? And what do I mean by this? Well, why do people buy your product? Okay. And I know maybe this is starting to sound a little bit more philosophical, or more, I know people who say, I don't want to talk strategy, I just want tactics. But sometimes you have to build your strategy off of tactics, right? And I want to look and say, well, why do people buy my product? And this can be, we want to understand the motivation of why people are buying it, because if we understand why they buy it, we're going to also understand the who buys it, right? And by who, I'm talking really digging into it. So a lot of people I work with, I do a lot of work in the medical industry, and I say, well, it's not, a hospital doesn't buy your product. It is the head of radiology. It is the head of the emergency services. Okay. It isn't a logistical company that buys your product. It is the fleet manager of a trucking company, right? Think about the personality of who is buying it, what their job definition is, what that person may look like, right? I was dealing with a product for years where typically the person buying the product was a nurse manager with about 20 years experience. So 9 times out of 10, we were looking at a very well-educated 50-year-old woman. And when we thought about it that way, it impacted a lot of how we sold, because we thought about the giveaways at trade shows, the colors we used at the trade shows, the graphics, everything. Okay, so if we understand who, we're also going to understand how that impacts the distributor. Does the distributor have relationships with that type of purchasing person? Okay, when is the product bought? And this comes down to a few things. There are what I would call triggering events or compelling events that will trigger a purchase. Those can be macro events, like a change in a law. Those can be micro events, like something going on in a person's lifetime. And it can also involve things like, well, do we buy on a tendering process? A lot of countries, when the government is doing the purchasing, they only buy during 1 month a year. Okay, so if you were selling to the Ministry of Health of probably half the countries in the world, you're going to get your purchase order from a very specific month out of the year. And you have to understand that, because that is the cycle that your distributor is going to work on. He's going to be working 11 months out of the year to influence that tender and then work on the tender during that month, right? So you have to understand all these things as you work into these countries, because this is going to help you identify the right partners, okay? And what are you trying to achieve in the market? And basically by that, I'm talking about, you know, where, what you're trying to achieve in the market. What would success look like to you, right? Do you need full coverage, right? Are you looking to get, is it realistic to expect that you are going to get market dominance? Are you looking, I tell people very often, if you're looking to get into Germany with an American-made manufactured product, 10% is a pretty good market share. Okay, that's a very realistic, easy to get. 40% of the German market is really difficult if you have a German competitor. So you sort of want to think this one through. Same type of thing with a country like India, right? You might not be able to be market dominant in India just because of the pricing. But if you get 50% of the upper 5% of socioeconomic levels in India, that's a huge market. And that's, that will help you plan what you're trying to achieve. And that's it. How do you measure success? What is going to be success for you? And are you going to be happy with the different, with the levels of success that you can actually achieve? Okay. Just a second here. Give me 1 second. I'm going to stop sharing my screen for 1 second. I want to make sure I didn't make a mistake here for a second. So, you know what? I am really sorry. Give me 1 second. I pulled up the wrong presentation. Give me 1 second.
No worries, Zach. Your information is valuable. Have no problem waiting a minute for you to make an adjustment there. No problem at all. And just so folks know, while we're waiting, I put, this is Melissa, in the chat, I put the typed notes from last session, and then I'm putting a link to the recording as well, to the original session.
Okay, sorry about that. Now let me.
And while Zach is getting that up, I'll just take the opportunity to let people know also on the 27th of May, we have a tariff roundtable discussion, so you can check our website if you're interested. Looks like Zach's back up and ready to go.
Yep. Yeah, I'm sorry. The structure and unfortunately the naming of my presentations was too similar, and I had pulled up the wrong one. So sorry about that. Anyway, now back in the saddle, we're going to talk about distributors. Okay. Now, 2 things very quickly. If you were not in the last session, we have some really good notes from the last session. We will have very good notes coming out of this session, including a 100-page ebook. So if you reach out to me either through LinkedIn or through my webpage or through my email, and you just say, hey, Zach, I was in the session. Can you send me the ebook on identifying markets and the ebook on finding distributors, I will do that. You can also reach out to Melissa or Cheryl. We will get you that information. We want you to have this information in your hand so that we can help. But now we're basically going to talk about building up the right distribution organization. And now in my mind, pretty much every company under the size of about $500 million should be working with distributors. And the distributors are really the ones who are going to make or break you. And I like to say, if you just sort of think about the idea that your primary goal is to get distributor salesperson engagement, if that's your single most important thing as a sales manager or international sales manager or whoever your job title is, if you think about that, you will succeed because everything else will come out of that engagement. But first we have to get good distributors, right? And I like to say that there are essentially three parts to the distributor, just like a triangle. Okay, three lines. There's bandwidth, which I'll talk about, engagement, and competency. Now, if you have zero of any of those, the triangle doesn't work. So you need to have a minimum, and then you have to have sort of a balance out for it to work. And if you think about a triangle, it would be really difficult to make a triangle work if you had very, very little of two things and a lot of another one, right? If you have a fair share of two things and then a little bit of a third thing, you can make it work. But you need that right balance of those three things: engagement, competency, and bandwidth. Okay. And when you look at it this way, think about bandwidth as the size of the bubble. Okay. Think about engagement. Now, engagement is how much they are engaged with you and they want to give you time. And to a large extent, this is sort of like you might call mind share. Okay. And each distributor salesperson gets up every morning and decides what he or she wants to sell. And the more bandwidth, the more mind share you have, the more engagement you have, the more likely they are to sell your product. Competency, and I'm going to talk about all of these in a bit, but competency is if they know how to sell your product. If you can drive up engagement, competency will follow. Okay, so if you can get people more engaged, they will want to learn how to sell your product more. And we sort of talked about randomness. I'm going to skip that now. Okay, the ideal distributor profile. This is how I like to start, okay? Because I want to think of what would that perfect distributor look like for me. This is sort of like the job description that you might do for somebody working in your factory or your company, right? But what does that ideal distributor profile look like? And that's going to involve competencies, bandwidth, and engagement, okay? What are some of the competencies that he is going to have to know, he or she is going to have to know? Well, they're going to have to understand the buyers, and typically they're going to have to understand what I like to call the decision-making unit that buys your product, okay? What does that mean? Typically, depending on what you sell, if you sell a consumer good, that good might just get sold to an individual, or if you're selling to very small businesses, maybe that gets sold to an individual decision maker. Okay. And you'd like to understand what that individual decision maker looks like. Again, that'll help build up your sales process. But very often, if you're selling capital equipment, if you're selling something that's more than maybe $30 to $50 to $100,000 in a purchase, there will probably be a decision-making unit that very often consists of a purchasing person or a finance person who pays for it, a maintenance or IT person who essentially evaluates that it does what it's supposed to do and will not damage the infrastructure it's attached to. Okay. And think about some of the things we buy or some of the things we sell, and very often they are being put into a bigger system, and the buyer wants to be sure that we're not going to damage that bigger system. It's pretty reasonable expectation. And then there will be the customer who actually wants your product. That is the person who said, yes, I need this product to solve a problem. That is the person with the problem. Now, why are these people important? Well, if your distributor cannot negotiate past the finance person, that distributor can't do your job. If this distributor cannot present and talk to the technical person, again, the distributor can't do their job. But most importantly, the distributor has to find the customer with the problem and help him understand that we can solve his problem. And then and the distributor has to build rapport with all of these people. Okay. So these are the primary functions of your distributor. Okay. When you think about it, working with the decision-making unit that will buy your product, that's the primary function of your distributor. Now, the next part of this is, well, how do they buy it? What is the decision-making path that the customer will take to buy my product? This could be they're going, I'll give you an example. Let's say you're selling a small medical device that people buy at home, and they are typically going to buy that in a pharmacy after their doctor has told them they should buy it. Okay, so what happens? Well, the doctor will suggest it to them, right? Then they will go to a pharmacy and they will buy it, but somebody has to go to that pharmacy and say, you should put this on your shelf and make it available. Okay, maybe somebody has to talk to the insurance company to say, well, this should be covered by insurance. Okay, so there are multiple things that have to be done so that the customer can get their hands on this. Alternatively, let's say you sell a product which is sold to a government Ministry of Health. And what happens is you have to talk to the Ministry of Health. You have to get the Ministry of Health to be interested in this. And then you have to talk to the right people so that they will build a tender. And then you have to maybe talk to them so that they will build a tender that fits your specifications so that when they do have a tender, you fit the specifications, but most of your competition does not. Okay. So these are the types of things, but every product and every market is going to have a slightly different purchasing path, or a buyer's path, sometimes people call it. And you need to understand this when you are building your ideal distributor profile. I teach selling. I have courses on this and I coach it. But I have how I define a sales process. I don't want anybody to feel obliged to adapt my system. I didn't, and by the way, I didn't invent this, but there are many, many systems out there. Understanding a system and using that as your model is pretty important here, whether it's my system or somebody else's system. I like to say there are four big parts. There's finding customers, there is building trust, there is helping the customer internalize we can help solve their problems, and then there's delivery and payment. And these are the four big groups of activities that are involved in the sales process, and nothing can get sold or done if we don't address all of these, right? If we can't find customers, we can't sell to them. If they don't trust us, we can't sell to them. If they don't believe that we can solve their problem, etc. In different markets and in different product lines, these may be more important or less important. I'll give you an example. If you are selling to, say, telephone companies or hospitals, you will have a very finite number of target prospects in your market, okay? And typically, let's say there are 10 telephone companies, you're going to know them and your distributor will know them. If you are selling to garages that repair, auto shops that repair cars, there might be an almost infinite number of these. So finding the customer now becomes a major part of the process. Building trust. If you are selling something that like I like to call missionary selling, that nobody else has been selling before, there's a high level of trust. If it is something that really impacts the career or could impact the life of the end user, right? Let's say you're selling a ventilator, okay? The level of trust involved on that is huge. Let's say you're selling a new type of brakes. The trust level has to be huge. So that's a big thing. Helping customers internalize we can solve their problem. That's just a fancy way of saying doing a good demo, right? What we want is not to go in and say, talk about my product and the wonderful metal it's made from. And the company was founded in 1926 and stuff like that. That doesn't help anybody. What we do want to do is be able to say, okay, you have this problem. I know you have this problem. I understand your problem. And this is how our product solves that problem. What does that really mean? Well, your distributor has to understand the workflow of the distributor really has to understand the workflow of your product. Okay, that is very, very important. He has to understand the day-to-day life of your customers, has to understand what the end users need. Okay, and the more he understands this, he or she understands this, the more he's going to be able to help them understand that you solve the problem. And then delivery. Here's what I'm going to tell you about the delivery issue. A lot of times I talk to people and they say, well, what's really important is our distributor has to have certain technical skills. If our distributor doesn't have these technical skills, then we can't sell through that distributor. And technical skills can typically be bought, right? I always say go for the selling skills and then figure out how you do the delivery. You can outsource delivery, you can outsource installation, you can outsource, or you can say to your distributor, hey, you have to hire somebody with this particular technical skill, okay? But if they don't know how to sell, you can't sell. It doesn't matter. You're not going to see revenue from this market. And I've seen this a lot where people come in and they say, well, what I really need is a distributor that has these technical installation skills, right? They have to be able, I was talking to somebody recently and they literally said, well, they have to be able to take our product and connect it to this other product because people will always want to buy the two of them connected. So the distributor has to have the physical ability just to essentially weld these two things together. And I said, look, you really want to sell this product. The product is $250,000 or something like that. Can you arrange to have somebody do the welding for you? How much would that cost? And the math was really crazy. It was almost nothing to get it done. So it was much more important to go with the selling skills than the technical skills. And I'd say 9 times out of 10, that's the case. Okay. Those of you who have spent any time working with me have seen me build a map like this. I am a big fan of building sales process maps. And I build sales process maps essentially for every client I work with or every problem I deal with. I like to look at the process map. And Sometimes I don't have time to really dig into it, but on today's session, I have a little bit of time. I have time to talk about it, so I'm excited about that, and I hope that I can do this in a way that you're going to find helpful. So imagine what we were looking at before, right? The different segments, okay? Finding customers, establishing trust, helping the customer internalize that we can solve the problem in delivery. Picture those as being different colors, right? So the purple here is finding the customers. The dark green is building trust. The gray is helping the customer internalize that we can solve their problem. The yellow is the things that have to do with delivery. Okay. Now think about the different shapes reflecting headquarters, regional sales manager, distributor, and then maybe any outsourced resources you might be using. Okay. So you could say, well, in this particular with this particular product and this particular market, we are going to, headquarters is actually going to come up with a list of all the potential end users in this market. Maybe you're going to do that. Or maybe you're going to say, well, no, the distributor is responsible for identifying all the end users, pulling up all the leads in the market. Okay. Then you say, okay, so we've identified who these people are. Now we're going to do research on them. Is that the distributor? Is that the regional sales manager? Is that an outsourced party? Okay. Then we're going to do outreach to them. Okay. That outreach could be a phone call. It could be a cold email. It could be a walk-in. And when I was selling and I was younger, virtually all of my intros were just a walk into a building. You know, I'd knock on the door and talk to people because I was selling a relatively high ticket item. And the technology also wasn't there back then. So we think about, well, how are we going to do our initial outreach? Okay. And why am I talking about the sales process so much? Because it's going to work out what that distributor looks like. Okay. Is my distributor going to hospital? Let's say I'm selling to hospitals and I'm selling to radiology units, just for ease of an example. Is my distributor going to radiologists today? And typically, when we're talking to distributors, they will call this a call point, right? What are my call points? I call up the radiology department. I call up the emergency department, okay? And if the distributor is calling on those departments today, then that's a good fit, okay? Now, so the distributor is doing an intro. The distributor will be doing what we like to call a discovery call. In today's sales slang, they call it a disco, but a discovery call, okay? And that means they have to have the skills to ask good questions. And I'll tell you my feeling about this, and this is a little bit esoteric, but the more and the better a salesperson understands the day-to-day workflow of the end user customer, right, the better they're going to be on discovery. And discovery is the cornerstone of both trust and building up, helping the customer internalize that we can solve his problems. Now, what do I mean by that? So I'll give you the example that I love using, because this is what probably the best question I ever asked in my sales career. I was selling something that was used by governments essentially to get more doses of vaccine out of vaccine that was sold to the country. So poor countries were using this to take essentially 3 units of vaccine and get 5 shots out of it. Very, very specific, aimed at very, very specific countries. And what I knew was these countries, for the most part, were not getting delivered all the vaccine they ordered. And it was causing them a lot of grief. So I go into this meeting with the Minister of Health and the head of the vaccination program of this one country in Africa, and I'm talking to them, and I say to the Minister of Health, well, can you tell me, did you get all the vaccines that you ordered from such and such company last year? And he says, well, of course, we ordered it, we paid for it, they delivered it, everything's going smoothly. And then when the head of the vaccination program came in, I said, did you get everything you ordered in time last year from this vaccine company? And she said, of course not. No, they only shipped me about half of what I ordered, and then the rest they shipped very late. And we started to talk about it. And in her mind, this was a problem that even her boss didn't understand. She didn't even talk to her husband about. Okay, this was a problem that I understood and nobody else seemed to understand. And it established such fantastic rapport, but it also made her understand that I knew how to solve her problem. Okay, so the right questions can really do that much towards moving sales forward. We're going to talk in training, we're going to talk about how you as the manufacturer can help develop these questions. But what you want to understand now is you want your distributor to have that level of rapport and that level of understanding with the end users. Okay. Can they do a demo? Do they have the skills to do the demo that you need? And think about what your demo looks like, because your demo might be, something the size of a bread box. You bring it in, you open up your bag, and you demo. It might be something that you have to fly to a reference site to do a demo. Okay, it might be something that can be done online. Think about how that demo is going to look like. But typically, when you're selling something that's expensive, one way or another, some type of a demo will be done. And then you need to go through the negotiations. You need to go through the process of purchasing. You need to manage a tender. You need to make sure that the money changes hands and the product changes hands. The distributor needs to be able to handle all of that, but you also have to figure out what parts of it are most important, what parts might be able to be outsourced, what parts of that might be done by your sales manager. So that's essentially the sales process, and this is the competency part. Okay. Now let's talk about bandwidth. Okay, and this is something. Typically at this point, there'll be 5 questions popping up in the chat, and people say, what's bandwidth? Explain bandwidth. Bandwidth is simply the available sales and possibly marketing resources that your distributor have in general, not specifically to your product, but in terms of their product line. Do they have 1,000 salespeople? Do they have 6 salespeople, right? Do they have people in every part of the territory you want to give them, or maybe not? Very often, distributors will come to you and they'll say, I know you were thinking about giving me Belgium, but you really should give me Belgium, France, and all French-speaking Africa plus Quebec, right? Because I speak French. And the question is, well, do you have bandwidth? Do you have coverage for that? Distributors in general always want bigger territories. And you have to judge if they have the correct bandwidth. Okay. Now, how do you estimate this? There are 2 ways to do this. And what I usually do for my clients, or I do when I'm looking into this, is I do both estimates and then I sort of merge them together. Okay. And what I mean by that is, let's start with how many prospects or leads are there in my territory, right? Am I selling to 50 hospitals, or am I selling to 4,000 hospitals? Am I selling to, 12 telephone companies, or am I selling to 22,000 households, right? I have to figure that one out and get a feel for it. Now, how many of those do I want to talk to in a year, and how long will it take? Okay, so for instance, let's say to make this relatively easy, I am selling to a market with 120 hospitals, okay? And I believe that the basic coverage should be about 10 hours on average to a hospital, okay? It's 120 hospitals, 10 hours each, 1,200 hours, okay? 1,200 hours is just over half of a full-time equivalent. A full-time equivalent salesperson is 2,000 hours. So 1,200 hours means that I'm a little bit more than half of a salesperson. Okay, now multiply that by 4, and now I need 2.5 salespeople, right? So you have to figure out how much you really want from the distributor. Now, take the other side of that. Let's say you say, well, what I really need is I need to close 12 purchase orders from this market. And on average, a purchase order takes 100 hours to close. Okay, so I need 1,200 hours to cover this market correctly. Okay, again, slightly more than half purchase order. Now, if you say, well, from looking from the bottom up is 1,200 hours and looking from the top down is 1,200 hours. 1,200 hours is a pretty good estimate to say that. And maybe you say, well, let's average that up and say we want a full-time equivalent. Okay, so that's how I do the math. Again, I'm going to tell you this. If this is a little bit complicated, reach out to me and I will send you some material that really explains this a little bit better, because it's very important. And I'll tell you, the other thing I'm going to tell you is 95% of sales managers don't do this calculation, right? And I think it's a mistake, because what happens is years from now, you are wondering if your distributor is giving you the right bandwidth or not. And it's very hard to go back and fix it. And one thing that I do with my clients, I can tell you, clients who have 20 years experience, one thing that I do with them is retroactively look at the bandwidth of their distributors to try and identify where their distributors need to put additional bandwidth into their products. So don't feel bad if you're not doing this, but you should be doing this. Doing this will put hundreds of thousands, if not millions of dollars every year in your pocket. Just this bandwidth evaluation is probably worth 25% growth if you do it correctly, even on an existing network. Okay, so a few rules of thumb. It's hard to judge engagement. It's very hard to change bandwidth. By that I mean, if you're talking to a potential distributor and he has 3 salespeople, he will probably not hire a 4th salesperson for you until sales are really growing. And then you're basically saying, well, sales can't grow without enough bandwidth, but you're not going to add bandwidth until we grow. It's something to think about. Okay, ability to increase competency is more important than competency. What do I mean by that? You don't necessarily need somebody who is really good at demoing your product. You need somebody who is really good at learning how to demo a product and has the skill set to demo your product. Okay, you need somebody who is really good at establishing rapport with doctors, and then he can learn how to establish rapport with radiologists. Okay, so that's something to think about. Again, if you have any questions about these, this is my bread and butter. I've been thinking about this for 40 years. It might be a little new and confusing. If you want to talk about it, reach out. All right, so we've put together a pretty good concept of what this person should look like, okay? And if he or she is a distributor today, they are selling something today, right? So imagine that now we know this distributor is out there and he is selling something. Well, what is he selling, right? And this is the trick, is if you say, well, I want somebody who is really competent at selling 50K products to radiologists in teaching hospitals. Boom. Well, what's the other product he might be selling? And we can come up with some ideas of products. Now, I'm not talking about competition. You don't necessarily want to come in and say, well, I sell a green widget. My biggest competitor is Ajax. So I want to find the distributor who is selling Ajax green widgets. That probably won't help you out because then your distributor is selling two very similar products and really then it comes down to price probably, right? And if they already have an existing relationship, it's going to be hard to gain mind share and engagement. No, what I'm talking about is you want to find a distributor who is selling a similar product that is sold to a similar person at a similar price point with a similar purchasing system, but it isn't the same product, right? And this is an exercise that you can all do. Those of you who have worked with me through North Carolina know that in the go-to-market plan, I'll pull up, I try and get like about 8 products like this. It's an exercise. I've been doing it for a long time, so it comes easily to me. But if you think about it, you can probably come up with a few different products that fit this framework, right? And again, if you want to reach out to me, I can maybe help prime the pump a little bit and come up with some ideas for you. Okay, so now what we know is we have a good ideal distributor profile, and we know what that distributor should be selling. And if we go back to last month, we have a list of countries we want to be selling into, right? So now we have the distributor, we have an ideal distributor profile. We know what that person should be selling, and we know what countries we want to be working in. And now the fun part comes, it's the search. Okay, we are now going to search for these distributors who are selling into these markets, who are selling those products into these markets. And this is the cornerstone of the way I do business. Okay, so there are a few different ways of doing this. And I'll tell you, if you have worked with North Carolina or with the federal government on a distributor search, if you come and you say, well, I'm looking for a distributor who is in the construction business, it's hard for them to narrow down the right distributor for you. Okay. But if you come and you say, look, I would like to be selling in Italy, and I'm looking for the guy who is today selling such and such a product. Can you find him? They could probably find him in an hour, right? Because they know what they're, at that point, they know what they're looking for, both the federal people and the North Carolina people, right? So it's the first thing you can do is just call up and say, hey, can you help me out here? And they can help you find these people. That's one thing. The other thing is that, and I do this all the time, this is good for about 30% of the time, but you basically just go to their website, the website of these companies that you're thinking about. And typically it won't say, here's where my distributors are. It'll say, contact us, or it'll say where we sell, or it might say find a distributor. But in about 30% of websites, there is going to be a screen like this that will allow you to pull up the name and address and contact details of their distributors. Okay. And it might look like this as well. Find a CPC distributor, right? And I do this a lot. Basically, the one thing I'll say is I'm going to talk a little bit later on about how I find people, how help people help me. This is something I end up doing a lot for my clients manually. I'll do the work just because it's not intuitive or that easy. This is one thing I wish I had a good virtual assistant who could do it. Okay. Next thing that I do is I use Sales Navigator. I don't know how many of you use Sales Navigator. And I don't know, like, honestly, of the people I know, and I have a lot of friends in international sales, I don't know anybody who uses it, Sales Navigator, for this. But here's the thing. Your distributors are out there on Sales Navigator, right? They're in LinkedIn. Typically, think about that, if you think about who really good distributors are, most really good distributors used to work for a manufacturer. And if you know what manufacturers that it's likely that that distributor used to work for, right? And again, let's say you're dealing with heavy agricultural equipment. You might be looking for a distributor who used to work for John Deere or Cat or Caterpillar or, one of those companies. If you're looking for somebody in the medical business, maybe the distributor used to work for Dräger or for Viasys, right? GE. So what you want to do is you want to look, and in Sales Navigator, you can look for people who used to work for a different company, right? Past companies. Most distributors are 10 people or less. So you look for, I'm looking in Africa. I'm looking in, say, Kenya. I'm looking for people who used to work for Dräger. Now they're in a company of less than 10 people and their function is selling, right? That is a distributor. Now, again, this takes time, but every distributor you want to work with is probably available through Sales Navigator if you put some time into it, and you can find them. There are two types of trade show for the most part. There are the big trade shows like the Hanover Messe or Arab Health or the Bauma construction trade show in Berlin, where companies from all over the world come to meet with distributors. The people who run the booths and own the booths at those trade shows are typically manufacturers. There's another type of trade show, and that is a little trade show that, say, services the German market for German end users, or services the Kazakh market for Kazakh end users. Typically, the people who have booths at those smaller trade shows are distributors. Okay. So let's say in this case, I am looking for a distributor who deals with auto aftermarket parts in Kazakhstan. So I go to this Auto Mechanica Astana trade show website. There are 468 distributors. About 300 of them are distributors who sell car parts. And if I go in, I can actually see what they're selling today. Okay, so I can see and I can say, wow, I'm actually looking for somebody who focuses on brake pads. And here's a guy, and they have brake pads, but they don't have my product. So this is great. Okay, and this is a fantastic way to find distributors. Now, it used to be, honestly, I would actually reach out to the local commerce department office and say, hey, can you get me a catalog from this show? Nowadays, 9 times out of 10, these shows are available online. If you are a forward-thinking kind of person, you can keep an eye on all of these shows, figure out where they are and when they are in your field, and then you can go and you can capture lists of distributors, even if you don't need them today, just so you have them up your sleeve for the future. It's probably a day, a month of work to keep abreast of all of this. Now this one's a little expensive, but it is a killer application, okay? Most of the big trade shows will sell their list of attendees. Okay, and they will in the one of the columns will say if they're a manufacturer or a distributor, right? So if you go to a trade show like Medica, which is a big German trade show, there are more than 100,000 visitors. About 75,000 of them are distributors, okay, or they're people who work for distributors. So for $1,000, $1,200, something like that. I don't remember how much I pay every year, but it goes anywhere from about $600 to about $1,200. I can buy the list of all the attendees. And now I have manufacturers, I have end users, but I have distributors. And now I have the country they're from, their website, their email. Sometimes I'll get their mobile number with this, right? And this is a phenomenal. I have, I buy a bunch of lists like this. I have literally 25, 35,000 distributors in my database that I use for clients where I can go in. And if you say, well, I really need a good distributor in Ghana for car aftermarket parts, well, I got them. So it's a good investment. Again, having these good distributors is a fantastic investment for you. And not working with mediocre distributors, right? Okay, so now I have a list. I have the countries I want to go into, and I have maybe 5 to 10 good distributors, or at least good on paper, for each market. Now, how do I get a hold of them? And this is going to be a little surprising because this is actually a piece of work right here. This is not the simplest part of the project. Okay, this takes a little bit of time and energy. So let's say I have the telephone number of the switchboard of a distributor in Brazil, and that is a perfect distributor for me. I know he's good, right? But if I call, I'm going to get a secretary who might hang up on me after a minute because she doesn't really understand English very well. And I'm saying, well, hello, I'm Zach, and I'd like to talk to somebody about being my distributor. And she doesn't quite get it. And maybe she hangs up on me, or maybe she just puts me on hold. And this can take time. Okay. So what do? Is I work with either Upwork or Fiverr, and I will use them once I have the distributor that I want to work with. I am going to try and find all the mobile numbers and the direct emails and the social media profiles of as many people as I can who work for these distributors. Now, I actually have an app that will do a lot of this for me, but I figure most of you probably don't. You can find people who will do this for you on Fiverr relatively cheaply. If you don't know what Fiverr is, look it up. It's Fiverr, but with 2 R's at the end. It's essentially a platform for getting people to do short-term work for you. And they're usually from all over the world, and they usually do really good jobs. You look for somebody who has a lot, if you take a look on my screen here, at the bottom it says like 4.8 and in parentheses 102. What that means is this person's gotten a rating of 4.8 on average out of 5, and 102 projects successfully have commented on their work, right? So you can know the quality of the work more or less from that kind of thing. But anyway, this way you can pull up a list. So now you have the country you want to work in, you have a list of distributors you want to work with, and now you have emails, direct emails, and mobile phone numbers of these people. Now, the next thing I like to do is I get on Fiverr or Upwork, and I will also get somebody to actually make the calls for me, okay? Because I don't want to spend hours calling Brazil and trying to, to make myself understood. So I can get somebody to call in Portuguese. I can get somebody to call in Spanish. I can get somebody to call in Arabic. I can get somebody to call in Japanese and Malaysian. And I find all these people, and basically I give them a short pitch. And I say, talk to the person, explain to them that I want to talk to them about being my distributor, and set up an appointment. Here's my appointment calendar link. Here's the script. And here's what you say, call. Okay. Now, it sounds like this might be a little complicated, but again, going back to that very first slide when I was talking about people who might spend 2 years trying to set up sales organization, I can set up a global sales organization in under 6 months, soup to nuts, everything, right? Using this system. So there's value in doing things a little bit differently than everybody else, okay? Now, we've talked a little bit about how we're going about doing this, right? How we're doing the calls, how we're finding the telephone numbers, how we're identifying, okay? But now we are pitching to the distributor, and we have to come up with a simple, easy pitch. I like to do pitch videos because nowadays it is really easy to do a 60 to 90-second video and to dub it into any language. So I love to do pitch videos, but you don't have to do a pitch video. Okay. What are the elements of a pitch to a distributor that are sort of different from the elements of a pitch to a end user? Okay. So the first thing that's important to a distributor is money. Can I make money off of this? But it isn't all about money. Is it easy to work with this company? And can I trust them? And what do I mean by trust? Every distributor has been burned at one point or another by somebody like us, okay? And it's really important to remember that. You might think you're the most trustworthy person in the world, but everybody has been burned by somebody like you, okay? So you want to show them why they can trust you. Now, what are they scared of? They're scared that you are going to enter the Brazilian market, demo to 20 people, sell 1 unit, and then pull out of the market, leaving the distributor to explain to everybody why you're not there anymore and give service to 1 unit without your help for the next 20 years. That's one thing they're scared of. Another thing is you're going to do so well that you're going to decide to open up an office and go direct. Or you're going to not trust that they're doing a good job, and you're going to decide to split up the market and hire 2 or 3 distributors. Okay, those are all threats to the distributor. They will put in money and effort and time and all of this, and then you're going to stab them in the back. And they're very concerned about that. That's part of it. Okay. What do I mean by ease? Well, I'm going to put in place tools that it's going to make it very easy for you to sell my product. And we're going to talk about that next time, and actually next time and the time after. But if you put in the right tools, you're going to make things easy for them. And you can actually sell this. When I talk to distributors, I say, look, we have a world-class playbook. We have fantastic coaching. We have a community of salespeople who support each other. You're going to find it very easy to learn how to sell our product. You're going to find it very easy to sell our product, right? We are a great manufacturer to work with. And money. Most people come in and they say, well, this is my product. This is the price. You figure it out. But what if you can come in and you say, look, here's research that I've done that shows that your market is growing for my product, and the market represents this much potential for you, right? That is, first of all, it shows you've done your homework. But secondly, that's a great way to show people that you really care about them and that you're thinking about them. Okay. So essentially, this is how your pitch should be built. From a technical perspective, you can make a video on it. I like to use, most recently, I use something called Synthesa. It's an AI platform that makes really, really good videos, and they will dub them into any language. You can also do just a short video if you use OBS or something on your computer. Dubbing them into other languages is really not difficult or expensive. And most times you want to deal with a distributor who speaks English, but I can tell you they do get a little kick out of it when you send them a 60-second pitch video in Arabic or, Malay or, German, right? So if you can do that, that's a great idea. That basically brings us to the end of what we're talking about. Again, so I'm going to answer some questions. If people have questions, I'm happy to dig into those questions. If you want, reach out to me by email or by LinkedIn, and I will get you material on this. I have a 100-page ebook on finding distributors. I have a 100-page ebook on identifying the right markets. Happy to send them to anybody who is in these. And if you are in these and you are part of South Carolina, you are eligible for lots of other goodies. If you're part of the North Carolina program, you are eligible for lots of goodies, things like, my access to my course. I'm happy to give you a bit of free coaching. If you work it out with Cheryl and Melissa, there are other programs that you might be eligible for, but I'm not giving those away. They have to go through Melissa and Cheryl. Anyway, I am up for answering questions now.
Looks like David has a question.
Cool. David, go ahead.
Hi, Zach. Good morning.
Hi.
Yeah,
It's good that you asked, David, but actually that is exactly what we're talking about next month. When are you dealing with them?
well, it's interesting. I've gotten several calls from Africa in the last week or two, and we've done a few video calls, and I'm using some of my limited Swahili to really connect with them, and it's worked out really well. So
That's
your
cool.
your webinar is very timely as I'm considering working with them. So I was wondering if I could contact you later for
I'll
maybe a
tell you what,
short
why don't you do
list.
this? Your North Carolina company?
Yes, sir.
Perfect. I'll tell you what, reach out to me. I'll give you an hour coaching. We'll go over the stuff. We'll talk about this and what I'm gonna address in next month's webinar. You'll get a sneak preview on. How's that sound?
Outstanding. Thanks. This was so perfectly timed. In fact, I was on a call this morning and yesterday morning early with them, so that it was really cool. But thanks so
The
much,
one
Zach.
thing I'm gonna say is I would really I'm gonna, you know what? I'm not gonna force you to do homework, but I'm gonna ask you to do homework, work on that ideal distributor profile, and work on, are these the right markets in Africa for you? And I'm not saying they aren't. I've sold a lot in Africa. I love selling in Africa. But I always say if somebody's reaching out to you, make sure that they fit your ideal distributor profile, or make sure you have, before anything else, make sure you understand what your ideal distributor profile is, and make sure you understand if that's a good market for you. Especially in a place like that, I'm not sure exactly what it is you sell, David, but if you sell something highly technical, imagine you get a product stuck in, Namibia, and you have to service it for the next 20 years, but you never sell another one, right? So, you want to be a little careful about that.
Yeah, we do shipping in logistics, and we've been
Oh,
shipping to
okay,
South Africa mining equipment and repair parts. So we've got
okay.
that down pretty well. So we could probably do a similar for them.
No, that's great, but I'm happy to set up a chat, David.
Great. Thank you, Zach. Outstanding. Great
Cool,
to see
great.
you all.
John, yeah, I'll tell you what, again,
Hey, Zach,
John, you're,
could you read it out loud just
oh,
in
I'm
case
sorry.
someone wasn't looking? Yeah.
I'm sorry. Hi, Zach. Great presentation. Thanks for sharing. I have a question. I'm having a hard time with the Brazilian market and finding the right distributor for this difficult but huge market. It is the automatic lubrication systems industry. Is there a suggested tip to find the best possible distributor? So I would say the what I've been talking about for the past half hour would be what I would suggest is the best possible tip. If you are John, you're a North Carolina company. Assuming you are, um, I'd be happy to meet with you. Reach out, set up an hour. We'll talk. I'll also send you my ebook on finding a distributor, which goes through in depth the things I just talked about. And then we can sort of play around with this and maybe figure out if we can use some of the things that I was talking about to find you the right distributor. How does that sound?
No, we can't hear you, John.
Hey, how about now?
Yeah.
Now we can hear you, John.
Okay, great. Thanks, Zach. Yes, whenever
So I'll tell you
you
what,
have time, please.
I will put, I'm sorry I didn't do this. I will put,
I put
a, sorry?
I put your email
Oh,
in the chat.
if you go to my LinkedIn, you will see how to set up a meeting with me.
Okay.
Okay? Or you go to my website, you go to my LinkedIn, or you send me an email. I will get you a meeting time. But on my LinkedIn, you can set up a meeting with me.
Got
Okay?
it. On
And just
LinkedIn.
grab an hour and we will work our way through it. Okay?
Great. Appreciate it.
Oh, not at all. Not at all. Any other questions?
So, Zach, just curious, the last session in the series of 6, you're going to talk about trade shows. So I'm thinking that maybe there's going to be some synergies between what you've taught today and preparing for a trade show.
Yep.
So if that is correct, then I'm not going to ask my question now. We'll wait. But
Well, there might be a different group of people online for that one than this one, so you can ask it twice.
oh, okay. Yeah, just some of us that are on the line are supporting North Carolina companies at various points of their journey, and some of those points in time would be when they're preparing to go
Right.
overseas for a trade show. And so I would assume that encouraging them to, formally, set time aside in advance to really develop that profile and
Right.
go into perhaps this trade show as an opportunity, one of various opportunities to try to conduct outreach with potential distributors, but having that opportunity to contact them in person, but then really just hit pause and then assess how those distributors may or may not fit into your profile is
Yeah.
kind of the
So,
game plan there.
yeah, so I'll talk about this in a couple of months, but I got, a few minutes to talk about this. Imagine, I mean, I go to a lot of trade shows, right? And I think some of us go to a lot of trade shows. Think about all those people. You go to a trade show, and there are all these people sitting around looking at their phones or reading a book, or they're nothing is getting done, right? And they've spent all this money and they don't really achieve anything. And this happens to a lot of people. Now, flip it to the other side. Imagine you get to a trade show, and by the time you got there, you have 20 meetings set up with distributors who are your ideal distributor profile, because 8 weeks before that trade show, you identified them, reached out to them, and set up meetings with them. Okay, so think about how powerful that is. Think about when you go to a trade show, everybody on the booth has a little cheat sheet that says, these are the 8 countries we're looking for. And these are the 8 countries that we really don't want, no matter what. If somebody walks in off the floor and wants to represent us from Bangladesh, they're a low priority. We're not going to sign anybody from Bangladesh because we've decided that isn't a good market. But we do want Nigeria because that is a good market, right? So let's say you start off with those 2 things. Now, let's say you start off with an ideal distributor profile and you've set it up by questions. So I can say, hey, John, tell me about your relationship with radiologists, right? Tell me about this. Tell me about what are your typical call points? Who are you going to see in the factory, right? So you have these questions set up. And then lastly, imagine you go into a trade show and you say, well, these are the 8 countries I'm most interested in, but I've already mapped out the bandwidth requirements for those countries. So when I talk to a distributor, I can say, tell me about your sales team. Do you have enough bandwidth to give me the bandwidth I need to get good coverage in this target market? Now, if you have all those things set up, think about the value of that trade show, how much better it's going to be for you than it would have been if you had gone in unprepared.
Yeah.
Is that a good answer? And then I can go to the next question.
Yes, Zach, thank you.
Okay, so the short can distributors help with homologation? I'm not pronouncing that correctly, of product. Yes, but you always want to keep in mind that your interest and your distributor's interest are not 100% in alignment. So you always have to wonder if it's worth paying a third party to do this instead of putting it with the distributor, who may then have more rights over it than you want them to, or they might not do it as well as somebody you pay, or they might not do it as quickly as somebody you pay. So you have to think about that. For me, I like to focus on the distributor's ability to sell. And anything else that I can outsource, I would rather outsource and get the distributor to be 100% focused on selling. And that's me. The best way to start to identify the best country to work in is, I'm guessing, I'm hoping that you weren't in our last session, because if you're asking me that after having sat through the last session, then I failed personally. But here's the deal. Reach out to me. I will get you a copy of my ebook on identifying the right market to go into. Okay? Read it, set up a meeting with me, and I'll help you. Okay? There's also, by the way, on my website, Global Sales Mentor, there's a tool to help identify the right markets to go into, and that's free. I didn't mention this, there are a lot of free resources on my website that you can use. So again, feel free to reach out. I'll get you a copy of my ebook on identifying the right markets, and then we can set up a session, and I'll be happy to coach you through identifying the top 5 markets for your product.
And just a reminder, in case some were on at the beginning, Zach has made available to North Carolina companies a video training library. So you would have kind of shorter segments on very specific elements of this whole international sales cycle. What you would need to do is, just make sure that both Zach and myself, or just one or the other is fine, and we'll loop each other in. But you need to get added to this library. So there's just something that Zach's assistant needs to do to make that happen. So we would also recommend leaning into those resources that he's made available to North Carolina companies.
Great.
Mhm. Great. And then
Whoever the patience, we will come to those questions. We'll actually deal with things like Incoterms later. If you, I don't typically push this, but if you go to Amazon and you buy my book, which I think is $1 now, on Kindle, I have a chapter on Incoterms. Okay, but I'm happy to address this. I'm pretty sure that's going to be in management, which is in August. Okay, but I will address it. If you're in a hurry, get my book. There's a whole chapter on Incoterms. If you really want to talk about it, set up a meeting. If you're a North Carolina company, set up a meeting. I will give you a session and we can talk about shipping, payments, Incoterms, all that. I've been dealing with Incoterms since I was, for almost 40 years at this point in my life.
right, and then I want to tell everyone the date of the next session. June 18th is going to be a deep dive into evaluating international distributors. So is that going to give us key points of what to expect on June 18th?
Yeah, think of it like, like dating, right? You want to know what to ask, how to present yourself, what to ask, and then basically how to matrix out an evaluation, right? Because you don't want to make a mistake. It's not, as serious as getting married, but I have distributors that I've been working with off and on for 35 years. Some of my best friends are distributors. I have salespeople who have worked with me with 4 different distributors over the course of years, right? Now, why do I say this? Choosing the right people and building up that relationship is key to your lifelong revenue and your lifelong success. So doing that well, evaluating correctly, and there are a lot of bad distributors out there, right? All you really need to be a distributor is to print up a business card now, So there are a lot of bad distributors. What we're going to do is we're going to talk about how to choose the real gold out of the whole pile of not gold.
All right. Well, we have reached our time. Thank you for your expertise, Zach. Thanks for everyone for staying on. Some people had to drop because this is what was a 90-minute deep dive, but we'll make sure to send out again the recording and the notes, and we look forward to seeing you on June 18th, and then reach out to us for the other resources in the meantime.
All right. Thank you so much.
I'm going to stop the recording now.